What about this one here?
Oh, right here.
It looks like a good Valentine's Day card.
This was inspired, this was a model that I worked with who was just amazing, who I met quite by accident in a nightclub. And I took one photograph, the very first photograph I took of her. She was dancing alone on the dance floor. I mean, the dance floor was crowded. It wasn't that it was empty, but she didn't have a dance partner. And I sort of grabbed her wrist and I had a camera. And I showed, we couldn't even communicate because the decibel level was so high.
Yeah.
So she knew I wanted to take her photograph, and I led her over to an area where it was sort of a good place to take a photograph, although in a nightclub like that there isn't really a good place. And when there were strobe lights going off, I handheld the shutter open, not knowing what exposure to use. This was a film camera. And miraculously I got an image, and I got her phone number, and then went back later to work with her over and over and over again. And it turns out she told me that a long time after that initial photograph that she realized she could not blink her eyes, because if she blinked her eyes on a long exposure, you would lose the definition of the eye. And I thought that was amazing. I mean, for me to meet somebody like that in that strange fashion, you know, that serendipitous fashion was just, it was almost like a miracle. I needed a model, but all of a sudden my path directly.
I remember seeing an interview with Michael Caine once where he was talking about acting, and you're not supposed to blink your eyes. So that's when I decided I wasn't going to be a movie star.
Pretty hard not
trying not to
blink
your eyes. It's harder than you think.
Well, let me go on to explain this piece that she has. I've done many portraits of her, and actually Alex Katz. She worked. She left Cleveland, went to New York City, and worked at Marlborough Gallery, which was the gallery that represented Alex Katz and a number of other well-known artists. And he met her, and he did a 12-foot painting of her head, which ended up in Interview magazine, and I have the issue.
Interesting. Oh,
yeah, I got the
I'd
issue.
love to see that.
So this piece is really about, it's about love. I mean, she's exuding sort of images of love out of the top of her head. Her head is perforated, as I use weird utensils to make my work. The perforations are really not that symbolic. They're mostly
I might say something that doesn't come through in these photographs, but there's a different level of sort of transparency or translucency to the materials.
Well, the background of this piece, actually the background of her, she's printed on transparent film, but the background is covered with gold leaf, well, not brass leaf, metal leaf, so that she has this gold metallic look to her. And then those two blocks, one on the left and one on the right, those two square panels, those are transparent material with metal leaf behind them as well. She's darker than the two rectangles or the squares on either side, but that's because I coated the surface with shellac to make it a darker kind of gold. And then the hearts are cut, actually it's a pair of woman's legs crossed wearing leopard designed hose. And yet in the magazine, that I found it in a magazine, the magazine with the legs crossed, it looked like a heart to me. So I just cut out that part.
Oh, interesting.
And then I've used that in a number of images. So it's basically about someone who's either sad, she looks sort of pondering and sad, and perhaps due to some a romantic mishap,